Gothic literature, the romantic imagination gone wild. The origins go back to the 18th century, these tales of horror, the supernatural, and the imagination. Gothic lit is concerned with characters who have a psychological depth and is the characteristic by several components, which include the supernatural. There are also several elements involving the setting that are most important in these ghost stories. And we'll focus on one of them.
Henry René Albert Guy de Maupassant, aka Guy de Maupassant, was born on August 5, 1850, in Normandy. He studied law in Paris, served in the army during the Franco-Prussian War, and worked as a civil servant. He is a popular French writer and is considered the father of the modern short story. His productivity was remarkable because he wrote 300 stories, 3 travel books, 6 novels, and 1 volume of verse. His writing is characterized by strong naturalistic language and keen observations of human life. He became mentally troubled as a man and attempted suicide. He was later committed to an asylum and died on July 6, 1893, at the age of 43. Was It a Dream? Is a ghost story. I had loved her madly. Yesterday I returned to Paris, and when I saw my room again, our room, our bed, our furniture, everything that remains of the life of a human being after death, I was seized by such a violent attack of fresh grief that I felt like opening the window and throwing myself out into the street. I could not remain between these walls which had sheltered her, which retained 1,000 atoms of her skin, and of her breath. I took up my hat to make my escape, and just as I reached the door, I passed the large mirror in the hall, which she had put there so she might look at herself every day from head to foot as she went out, from her little boots to her bonnet. I stopped short in front of that looking glass, in which she had so often been reflected, so often that it must have retained her reflection. I was standing there trembling, with my eyes fixed on the glass, on that flat, profound, empty glass, which had contained her entirely, and had possessed her as much as I. I felt as if I loved that glass. I touched it. It was cold. Soulful mirror, burning mirror, horrible mirror, to make men suffer such torments. Happy is the man whose heart forgets everything that it has contained. I went out without knowing it toward the cemetery. I found her simple grave, a white marble cross, with these few words: she loved, was loved, and died. She is there below. I sobbed with my forehead on the ground, and I stopped there for a long time. Then I saw it was getting dark, and a strange mad wish, the wish of a despairing lover, seized me. I wished to pass the night in weeping on her grave. But I should be seen and driven out. How was I to manage? I was cunning, and got up and began to roam the city of the dead. I walked and walked. How small the city is in comparison with the city in which we live. And yet how much more numerous the dead are than the living. We need high houses, wide streets, and much room. And for all the generations of the dead, there is scarcely anything. The earth takes them back. Adieu. At the end of the cemetery, I was in its oldest part, where the crosses themselves are decayed. It is full of untended roses, of strong and dark cypress trees, a sad and beautiful garden. I was perfectly alone, so I crouched under a green tree and hid myself amid the thick and somber branches. When it was quite dark, I left my refuge and began to walk softly. I wandered about for a long time, but I could not find her tomb again. I went on with extended arms, knocking against the tombs with my hands, my feet, my knees, my chest, even with my head, without being able to find her. I groped about like a blind man. I felt the stones, the crosses, the iron railings, and the wreaths of faded flowers. I read the names with my fingers. I could not find her again. There was no moon. What a night. I was horribly frightened in these narrow paths between two rows of graves. I sat down on one of them, for I could not walk any longer. My knees were so weak. I could hear my heart beat, and I heard something else as well. What? A confused, nameless noise? Was the noise in my head, in the impenetrable night, or beneath the mysterious earth? I looked all around me. I was paralyzed with terror, cold with fright, ready to shout out, ready to die. Suddenly it seemed to me that the slab of marble on which I was sitting was moving, as if it were being raised. With a bound, I sprang onto the neighboring tomb, and I distinctly saw the stone, which I had just quitted, rise upright. And the dead person appeared, pushing the stone back with its bent back. I saw it quite clearly, although the night was so dark. On the cross I could read, "Here lies Jacques of Villot, who died at the age of 51. He loved his family, was kind and honorable, and died in the grace of the Lord." The dead man also read what was inscribed on the tombstone. Then he picked up a stone off the path, a little pointed stone, and began to scrape the letters carefully. He slowly effaced them, and with the hollow of his eyes, he looked at the place where they had been engraved. Then, with the tip of the bone that had been his forefinger, he wrote in luminous letters, "Here reposes Jacques Olivat, who died at the age of 51. He hastened his father's death by his unkindness. As he wished to inherit his fortune. He tortured his wife, tormented his children, deceived his neighbors, robbed everyone he could, and died wretched." When he finished writing, the dead man stood motionless, looking at his work. On turning around, I saw that all the graves were open, that all the dead had emerged, and that all had effaced the lines inscribed on their gravestones by their relations, substituting the truth instead. And I saw that all had been tormentors of their neighbors, malicious, dishonest, hypocrites, liars, rogues, that they had stolen, deceived, performed every disgraceful, every abominable action. These good fathers, these faithful wives, these devoted sons, these chaste daughters, these honest tradesmen. They were all writing at the same time, on the threshold of their eternal abode, the truth, the terrible and the holy truth, of which everybody was ignorant, or pretended to be ignorant while they were alive. I thought she must have written something on her tombstone, and now running without any fear, I went toward her, sure that I should find her immediately. I recognized her at once without seeing her face, and on the marble cross where shortly before I had read, "She loved, was loved, and died," I now saw. Having gone in the rain one day, in order to deceive her lover, she caught cold and died. It appears they found me at daybreak, lying on the grave, unconscious.